Welcome once again, everyone. And you've all probably know the summary by heart by now, but might be good to just refresh a little bit. So here we go again. The big time is told over the course of a couple of hours on a claustrophobically small stage known as the place. And it's sort of a regular theater in the round with the void for an audience. It's a rest and recuperation station for soldiers in a time war. And it's a stage that exists outside of time and space, crewed by three men: Sid, sort of in charge, Doc, a hopelessly alcoholic Russian doctor, and Bo, a riverboat gambler from an alternate American South, and three women who we are told are as much nurses as they are whores: Maud, Lili, and Greta Forzane, our narrator. Their job is to ensure that the soldiers are patched up and sent off happy for their next mission into time. There are two sides in the change war: spiders and snakes. They both enlist the recently dead in their armies. They pluck them from time in their ordinary existence just moments before they die, and then have them battle to ensure that something, somehow, somewhen comes out the way it should, to guarantee one side or the other ultimate victory. Enter three soldiers: a Nazi stormtrooper, an English poet who died at Passchendaele, a Roman, and later another three: two aliens, one from the distant past, one from the far future, and a Cretan woman soldier with Labrys. And we learn a little about the change wars. The poet and the new girl fall in love. An atomic bomb is set off and will explode in half an hour, while the maintainer, the engine that keeps the place in existence, has mysteriously vanished in what reveals itself and the play to be a cunningly constructed locked room mystery. And as in all wars, soldiers are fighting battles they cannot understand the reason for, will not see the results of. In this war, soldiers see action across time. Atrocities occur for reasons that are never explained. The past and the future are relatively fluid, allowing battles to be fought and refought. Nobody believes themselves to be fighting on the side of right. They owe allegiance to the side who brought them back from the dead to fight, but with no sense that they are fighting a just battle. And as we learn, they have no concept of who or what the spiders or the snakes actually are, nor what they ultimately want. Many discussions took place about all these things, including certain wondering about, rather than going through battles in different times and places, maybe instead they could use their soldiering forays for creating peace rather than engaging in battles. And in our last episode, there was lots of discussions about the maintainer, and because it had gone missing, and so inversion took place, which means that the place basically got locked down and separated from the universe, sort of a sealed, perfect environment of sorts, but also a completely isolated one. And as far as they know, they may be the only ones left to carry civilization forward. And so there's a lot of commotion and hubbub, and they're going through various questions, accusations, checking alliances, as one might expect in a situation like that, where there's an atomic bomb that needs to be disarmed. And they're having a lot of questioning about that and jostling about who planted the bomb and who hid the maintainer. And they weren't letting some of the people near the maintainer because they thought that was the person who maybe hid it in the first place and might purposely set off the bomb. And so that it started last time literally fighting physically and grabbing for the maintainer. And so with that, please join us now as we look in on what happens next. Chapter 14. Like diamonds, we are cut with our own dust. Webster. Now will you talk?
Cretans have eyes under their back hair, or let's face it, entertainers aren't soldiers. Kaby weaved to one side and flicked a helpful hand, and poor old Maud went where she'd been going to send Kaby. It sickened me to see the gravity take hold and yank her down. I could have jumped up and made it 4 in a row for Kaby, but I'm not a bit brave when things like my life are at stake. Lili was starting to get up, acting a little dazed. Kaby gently pushed her down again and quietly said,
"Where is it?"
and then hauled off and slapped her across the face. What got me was the matter-of-fact way Kaby did it. I can understand someone getting mad and socking someone, or even deliberately working up a rage so as to be able to do something nasty. But this cold-blooded way turns my stomach. Lili looked as if half her face were about to start bleeding, but she didn't look dazed anymore, and her jaw set. Kaby grabbed Lili's pearl necklace and twisted it around her neck, and it broke, and the pearls went bouncing around like ping-pong balls. So Kaby yanked down Lili's gray silk bandeau until it was around the neck and tightened that. Lili started to choke through her tight-pressed lips. Erich, Mark, and Illy had come up and crowded around, but they seemed to be content with the job Kaby was doing.
"Listen, slut, we have no time. You have a healing room in this place. I can work the things."
Here it comes, I thought, wishing I could faint. On top of everything, on top of death even, they had to drag in the nightmare personally stylized for me, the horror with my name on it. I wasn't going to be allowed to blow up peacefully. They weren't satisfied with an A-bomb. They had to write my private hell into the script.
"There is a thing called an inverter."
Kaby said exactly as I'd known she would. But as I didn't really hear it just then, a mental split I'll explain in a moment.
"It opens up so they can cure your insides without cutting your skin or making you bleed anywhere. It turns the big parts of you inside out, but not the blood tubes. All your skin, your eyes, ears, nose, toes, all of it, becoming the lining of a little hole that's half filled with your hair. Meantime, your insides are exposed for whatever the healer wants to do to them. You live for a while on the air inside the hole. First, the healer gives you an air that makes you sleep, or you go mad in about 50 heartbeats. We'll see what 10 heartbeats do to you without the sleepy air. Now will you talk?"
I hadn't been listening to her, though, not the real me, or I'd have gone mad without getting the treatment. I once heard Doc say your liver is more mysterious and farther away from you than the stars, because although you live with your liver all your life, you never see it or learn to point to it instinctively, and the thought of someone messing around with that intimate yet unknown part of you is just too awful. I knew I had to do something quick. Hell, at the first hint of introversion, before Kaby had even named it, Illy had winced, so that his tentacles were all drawn up like fat feather sausages. Erich had looked at him questioningly, but that lousy loony had unendeared himself to me by squeaking,
Don't mind me, I'm just sensitive. Get on with her. Make her tell.
Yes, I knew I had to do something, and here on the floor that meant thinking hard and in high gear about something else. That screwball sculpture Erich had tried to smash was a foot from my nose, and I saw a faint trail of white stuff where it had skidded. I reached out and touched the trail. It was finely gritty, like powdered glass. I tipped up the sculpture, and the part on which it had skidded wasn't marred at all, not even dulled. The gray spheres were as glisteningly bright as ever. So I knew the trail was diamond dust, rubbed off the diamonds in the floor by something even harder. That told me the sculpture was something special. And maybe Doc had had a real idea in his pickled brain when he'd been pushing the thing at all of us and trying to tell us something. He hadn't managed to say anything then, but he had earlier when he'd been going to tell us what to do about the bomb. Maybe there was a connection. I twisted my memory hard and let it spring back, and I got inverse, bosh. Bosh indeed. Bosh and inverse boshed all boozers, Rusky or otherwise. So I quick tried the memory trick again, and this time I got gloves. And then I grasped and almost sneezed on diamond dust as I watched the pieces fit themselves together in my mind like a speeded up movie reel. It all hung on that black right-hand hussar's glove Lili had produced for Bruce. Only she couldn't have found it in stores, because we'd searched every fractional pigeonhole later on, and there hadn't been any gloves there. Not even the left-hand mate there would have been. Also, Bruce had had 2 left-hand gloves to start with, and we had been through the whole place with a fine-tooth comb, and there had been only 2 black gloves on the floor where Bruce had kicked them off the bar. Those 2, and only those 2. The left-hand glove he'd brought from outside, and the right-hand glove Lili had produced for him. So a left-hand glove had disappeared. The last I'd seen of it, Lili had been putting it on her tray, and a right-hand glove had appeared, which could only add up to one thing. Lili had turned the left-hand glove into an identical right. She couldn't have done it by turning it inside out the ordinary way, because the lining was different. But as I knew only too sickeningly well, there was an extraordinary way to turn things inside out, things like human beings. You merely had to put them on the inverter in surgery and flick the switch for full inversion. Or you could flick it for partial inversion and turn something into a perfect 3-dimensional mirror image of itself, just what a right-hand glove is of a left. Rotation through the 4th dimension, the science boys call it. I've heard of it being used in surgery on the highly asymmetric Martians, and even to give a socially impeccable right hand to a man who'd lost one by turning an amputated right arm into an amputated left. Ordinarily, nothing but live things are ever inverted in surgery, and you wouldn't think of doing it to an inanimate object, especially in a place where the docs are drunk and the surgery hasn't been used for hundreds of sleeps. But when you've just fallen in love, you think of wonderful, crazy things to do for people. Drunk with love, Lili had taken Bruce's extra left-hand glove into surgery, partially inverted it, and got a right-hand glove to give to him. What Doc had been trying to say with his inverse bosh was invert the box, meaning we should put the bronze chest through full inversion to get at the bomb inside to disarm it. Doc, too, had got the idea from Lili's trick with the glove. What an inside-out tactical atomic bomb would look like, I could not imagine. It did not particularly care to see. I might have to, though, I realized. But the fast-motion film was still running in my head. Later on, Lili had decided, like I had, that her lover was going to lose out in his plea for mutiny, unless she could give them a really captive audience. And maybe even then she had been figuring on creating the nest for Bruce's chicks and all those other things we'd believed in for a while. So she'd taken the major maintainer and remembered the glove, and not many seconds later she had set down on the shelf of the art gallery an object that no one would think of questioning, except someone who knew the gallery by heart. I looked at the abstract sculpture a foot from my nose, at the clustered gray spheres the size of golf balls. I had known that the inside of the maintainer was made up of vastly tough, vastly hard, giant molecules, but I hadn't realized they were quite that big. I said to myself, Greta, this is going to give you a major psychosis, but you're the one who has to do it, because no one is going to listen to your deductions when they're all practically living on negative time already. I got up as quietly as if I were getting out of a bed I shouldn't have been in. There are some things entertainers are good at. And Kaby was just saying, you go mad in about 50 heartbeats. Everybody on their feet was looking at Lili. Sid seemed to have moved, but I had no time for him, except to hope that he hadn't done anything that might attract attention to me. I stepped out of my shoes and walked rapidly to surgery. There's one good thing about this hardest floor anywhere. It doesn't creak. I walked through the surgery screen that is like a wall of opaque, odorless cigarette smoke, and I concentrated on remembering my snafu nurse's training, and before I had time to panic, I had the sculpture positioned on the gleaming table of the inverter. I froze for a moment when I reached for the inversion switch, thinking of the other time and trying to remember what it had been that had bothered me so much about an inside-out brain being bigger and not having eyes. But then I either thumbed my nose at my nightmare or kissed my sanity goodbye, I don't know which, and twisted the switch all the way over. And there was the major maintainer, winking blue about 3 times a second, as nice as you could want it. It must have been working as sweet and steady as ever, all the time it was inverted, except that, being inside out, it had hocused the direction finders.
Chapter 15, Black-Legged Spiders with Red Hearts of Hell. The Marquis. Lord Spider.
Yazoo!
I turned, and Sid's face was sticking through the screen like a tinted bas-relief hanging on a gray wall, and I got the impression he had peered unexpectedly through a slit in the arras into Queen Elizabeth's bedroom. He didn't have any time to linger on the sensation, even if he'd wanted to, for an elbow with a copper band thrust through the screen and dug his ribs, and Kaby marched Lili in by the neck. Erich, Mark, and Illy were right behind. They caught the blue flashes and stopped dead, staring at the long-lost maintainer. Erich spared me one look which seemed to say, "So you did it. Not that it matters." Then he stepped forward and picked it up and held it solidly to his side in the double right angle made by fingers, forearm, and chest, and reached for the introversion switch with a look on his face as if he was opening a fifth of whiskey. The blue light died, and change winds hit me like a stiff drink that had been a long, long time in coming, like a hot trumpet note out of nowhere. I felt the changing past blowing through me and the uncertainties whistling past, and ice-stiff reality softening it with all its duties and necessities, and the little memories shredding away and dancing off like autumn leaves, leaving maybe not even ghosts behind, and all the crazy moods like Mardi Gras dancers pouring down an evening street, and something inside me had the nerve to say it didn't care whether Greta Forzane's death was riding in those winds because they felt so good. I could tell it was hitting the others the same way. Even battered, tight-lipped Lili seemed to be saying, "You're making me drink the stuff and I hate you for it, but I do love it." I guess we'd all had the worry that even finding and extroverting the maintainer wouldn't put us back in touch with the cosmos and give us those winds we hate and love. The thing that cut through us as we stood there glowing was not the thought of the bomb. Well, that would have come in a few seconds more, but Sid's voice. He was still standing in the screen, except that now his face was out the other side, and we could just see parts of his gray doubleted back. But of course his Yesu came through the screen as if it weren't there. At first I couldn't figure out who he could be talking to, but I swear I never heard his voice so courtly obsequious before, so strong, and yet so filled with awe and an undernote of, yes, sheer terror.
Lord, I am filled from top to toe with confusion that you should so honor my poor place. Poor say I in mine, when I mean I have ever bossed it faithfully for you, not dreaming that you would ever condescend, yet knowing that your eye was such as ever upon me, though I am but as a poor pinch of dust adrift between the suns. I abase myself. Prithee, how may I serve thee, sir? I know not even how most suitably to address thee. Lord, King, Emperor Spider?
I felt like I was getting very small, but not a bit less visible, worse luck. And even with the change winds inside me to give me courage, I thought this was really too much, coming on top of everything else. It was simply unfair. At the same time, I realized it was to be expected. The big bosses would have been watching us with their unblinking, beady black eyes ever since we had introverted, waiting to pounce if we should ever come out of it. I tried to picture what was on the other side of the screen, and I didn't like the assignment. But in spite of being petrified, I had a hard time not giggling, like the zany at graduation exercises, at the way the other ones in surgery were taking it. I mean, the soldiers, they stiffened up like they had an old ramrod inside them, and their faces got that important look, and they glanced at each other and the floor without lowering their heads, as if they were measuring the distance between their feet and mentally chalking alternate sets of footsteps to step into. The way Erich and Kaby held the major and minor maintainers became formal. The way they checked their collars and nodded reassuringly was positively esoteric. Even Illy somehow managed to look as if he were on parade. Then from beyond the screen came what was, under the circumstances, the worst noise I've ever heard. A seemingly wordless, distant-sounding howling and wailing with a note of menace that made me shake, although it also had a nasty familiarity about it I couldn't place. Sid's voice broke into it, loud, fast, and frightened.
Your pardon, Lord. I did not think. Such is the gravity. I'll attend to it on the instant.
He whipped a hand and a half ahead back, through the screen, but without looking back, and snapped his fingers, and before I could blink, Kaby had put the minor maintainer in his hand. Sid went completely out of sight then, and the howling stopped. And I thought that if that was the way the Lord Spider expressed his annoyance at being subjected to incorrect gravity, I hoped the bosses wouldn't start any conversations with me. Erich pursed his lips and threw the other soldiers a nod, and the four of them marched through the screen as if they'd drilled a lifetime for this moment. I had the wild idea that Erich might give me his arm, but he strode past me as if I were an entertainer. I hesitated a moment then, but I had to see what was happening outside, even if I got eaten up for it. Besides, I had a bit of the thought that if these formalities went on much longer, even a Lord Spider was going to discover just how immune he was to a confined atomic blast. I walked through the screen with Lili beside me. The soldiers had stopped a few feet in front of it. I looked around ahead for whatever it was going to turn out to be, prepared to drop a curtsy or whatever else, bar nothing, that seemed expected of me. I had a hard time spotting the beast. Some of the others seemed to be having trouble too. I saw Doc weaving around foolishly by the control divan, and Bruce and Bo and Seven Sea and Maud on their feet beyond, and I wondered whether we were dealing with an invisible monster. Ought to be easy enough for the bosses to turn a simple trick like invisibility. Then I looked sharply left, where everyone else, even glassy-eyed Doc, was coming to look into the door sector. Only there wasn't there any monster there or even a door, but just Sidney holding the minor maintainer and grinning like when he was threatening to tickle me, only more fiendishly.
Not a move, masters,
His
or
eyes were dancing.
I'll pin the pack of you down. Marry and amend I will. It is my firm purpose to see the place blasted before I let this instrument out of my hands again.
My first thought was, "Blood, City," but City is a real actor. I don't care if he didn't study under anyone later than Burbage. That just proves how good Burbage is. Sid had convinced us not only that the real spiders had arrived, but earlier that the gravity in the edge of stores had been a lot heavier than it actually was. He completely fooled all those soldiers, including my swelled-headed victorious little commandant, and I kind of filed away the timing of that business of reaching out the hand and snapping the fingers without looking. It was so good.
Oh, to God, get to the major maintainer and call headquarters, but don't come through the door. Mary, go by refresher. I'll not have a single demon of you in this sector with me until much more has been shown and settled.
City, you're wonderful, I said, starting toward him. As soon as I got the maintainer unsnarled and looked around and saw your sweet old face.
Ah, tricksy troll, not the breath of one scarlet toenail nearer me, you queen of sleights and high priestess of deception. You least of all do I trust. Why you hid the maintainer I know not, Faith, but later you'll discover the truth to me, or I'll have your gizzard.
I could see there was going to have to be a little explaining. Doc, touched off, I guess, by Sid waving his hand at me, threw back his head and let off one of those shuddery Siberian wolf howls he does so blamed well. Sid waved toward him sharply, and he shut up, beaming toothily. But at least I knew who was responsible for the spider wail of displeasure that Sid had either called for or more likely got as a gift of the gods and used in his act. Bo came circling around fast, and Erich shoved the major maintainer into his hands without making any fuss. The four soldiers were looking pretty glum after their grand review. Bo dumped some junk off of one of the art gallery's sturdy tabourets and set the major maintainer on it carefully, but fast, and quickly knelt in front of it and whipped on some earphones and started to tune. The way he did it snatched away from me my inward glory and my big inversion brainwave so fast I might never have had it. And there was nothing in my mind again but the bronze bomb chest. I wondered if I should suggest inverting the thing, but I said to myself, Greta, you got no diploma to show them, and there probably isn't time to try two things anyway. Then Erich for once did something I wanted him to do, though I didn't care for its effect on my nerves, by looking at his collar and saying quietly,
9 minutes to go if place, time, and cosmic time are syncing.
Bo was steady as a rock and working adjustments so fine that I couldn't even see his fingers move. Then, at the other end of the place, Bruce took a few steps toward us. Seven Sea and Maud followed a bit behind him. I remembered Bruce was another of our nuts with a private program for blowing up the place.
Sidney. Remember, Sidney, you and I both came down to London from Peterhouse.
I didn't get it. Then Bruce looked toward Erich with a devil-may-care challenge, and toward Lili as if they were asking her forgiveness for something. I couldn't read her expression. The bruises were blue on her throat, and her cheek was puffy. Then Bruce once more shot Erich that look of challenge, and he spun and grabbed Sevensee by a wrist and stuck out a foot. Even half-horses aren't too sharp about infighting, I guess, and the satyr had every right to feel at least as confused as I felt, and sent him stumbling into Maud, and the two of them tumbled to the floor in a jumble of hairy legs and pearl gray frock. Bruce raced to the bomb chest. Most of us yelled, "Stop him!
Stop him,
Sid! Pin him
Pin him
down!"
down.
Or something like that. I know I did, because I was suddenly sure that he'd been asking Lily's pardon for blowing the two of them up, and all the rest of us too, the love-blinded stinker. Sid had been watching him all the time, and now he lifted his hand to the minor maintainer. But then he didn't touch any of the dials, just watched and waited. And I thought, Shaitan shave us. Does Siddy want in on death too? Ain't he satisfied with all he knows about life? Bruce had knelt and was twisting some things on the front of the chest, and it was all as bright as if he were under a bank of Klieg lights, and I was telling myself I would know anything when the fireball fired, and not believing it. And Sevensee and Maud had got unscrambled, and we were starting for Bruce, and the rest of us were yelling at Sid, except that Erich was just looking at Bruce very happily, and Sid was still not doing anything. And it was unbearable, except just then I felt the little arteries start to burst in my brain like a string of firecrackers, and the old aorta pop, and for good measure, a couple of valves come unhinged in my ticker. And I was thinking, well now, I know what it's like to die of heart failure and high blood pressure, and having a last quiet smile at having cheated the bomb, when Bruce jumped up and back from the chest.
That does it. She's as safe as the Bank of England.
Sevensee and Maud stopped themselves just short of knocking him down, and I said to myself, hey, let's get a move on. I thought heart attacks were fast. Before anyone else could speak, Bo did. He had turned around from the major maintainer and pulled aside one of the earphones.
I got headquarters. They told me how to disarm the bomb. I merely said I thought we ought to know. What did you do, sir?
There's a row of 4 ankhs just below the lock. The first to your left, you give a quarter turn to the right. The second, a quarter turn to the left. Same for the fourth, and you don't touch the third.
That is it, sir.
The long silence was too much for me. I guess I must have the shortest span for unspoken relief going. I drew some nourishment out of my restored arteries into my brain cells and yelled, Siddy, I know I'm a tricksy troll and the high vixen of all foxes, but what the hell is Peterhouse?
The Owners College at Cambridge.
This concludes episode 8 of The Big Time for this evening. And if you join us in 2 weeks, 9th and final episode of this alternate reality entitled The Big Time by Fritz Leibner.